Hello and welcome to Defence Line, our weekly show on defence, security and more. The recent, unexpected and sudden death of 5 Indian peacekeepers in South Sudan has again brought back the spotlight on the ongoing turmoil, which is an offshoot of the 2 decades-long civil war in Sudan. What does this mean for the United Nations peacekeeping missions in South Sudan? Will this affect the other UN missions where Indian soldiers are deployed? This is what we discussed today with retired Lieutenant General Jasbir Lidder, who has not only been the force commander of the UN mission in Sudan, but also the main coordinate of the UN effort which resulted in the birth of South Sudan in 2011. We also have retired Major General Virendra Kumar, who has also served in UN mission. He has served in Central America. Gentlemen, welcome to the discussion. But before that, let us look at this report.
Five Indian soldiers, including a lieutenant colonel, were killed and another 5 injured in an ambush by rebels in South Sudan. The deceased were identified as Lieutenant Colonel Mahipal Singh, Naik Subedar Shiv Kumar Pal, Havaldars Hira Lal and Bharat Sasmal and Sepoy Nand Kishore. The soldiers were serving as peacekeepers with the United Nations mission in the Republic of South Sudan. The violence happened in Jonglei state, a haven for armed groups. Jonglei has been hit by widespread ethnic violence since South Sudan became independent from Sudan in July 2011, with much of it taking place in Pibor County, where the UN peacekeeping force is based. UN mission has been in South Sudan since the country's creation, with a remit to preserve peace and security. India contributes around 2,200 personnel to 2 battalions in South Sudan, one based in Jonglei and the other in Malakal on the border with Sudan. The recent killings have added up to over 140 Indian soldiers who have been killed in UN missions since India's first commitment to Korea began in 1950. India figures in the top 3 troop contributors for UN missions around the globe and currently has 6,950 soldiers deployed in different UN missions. The contingents in war-ravaged Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan are the largest in terms of numbers. Over the last 55 years, India has deployed well over 100,000 Indian troops, military observers and police officers in UN missions. However, it has not yet yielded much in terms of its efforts to seek a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. But the large troop contribution does reinforce India's claim for a permanent seat when the UNSC is expanded. Also, Indian Army battalions covet UN assignments since the troops get handsome monetary compensation, with officers getting up to $2,200 and other ranks $1,100. More importantly, it gives the battalions some much-needed respite from being deployed in debilitating counter-insurgency operations in Jammu and Kashmir and Northeast, as well as forward posts on the borders with China and Pakistan.
We are in conversation with 2 retired military officers who have been on UN peacekeeping missions. General Lidder, the death of 5 Indian peacekeepers in South Sudan is absolutely shocking. Does the incident surprise you, since you've been associated with Sudan since 2006?
Yes and no. Yes, it does surprise me, because the way UN deploys today, it has a whole lot of safeguards, it has a whole lot of security instructions laid out, and the rules of engagement are pretty robust. Right. So really speaking, such casualties do come as a surprise whenever they do happen. Having said that, the security situation in Sudan, in South Sudan especially, is of grave concern. It was always there, and South Sudan gained its independence without resolving a lot of other issues which we can talk about.
But we've had earlier instances where UN teams have been attacked, no?
In South Sudan, yes. Mainly in Darfur. Not so much in South Sudan. When I was there in South Sudan, we had a good equation with the government, and we did not have any attacks during that time. But in Darfur, where a hybrid mission is deployed, there have been very frequent attacks, large-scale attacks on the peacekeepers.
I'll just come back to you. General Kumar, you've been on UN missions. You were deployed in Central America many years ago. Do you have such attacks? Are such attacks on UN convoys, usual?
Not exactly. The complexion of the Central American mission was very different than the missions now being undertaken by the UN.
Okay.
post 1991, I was there in 89 in Central America. That was an era when mostly observer missions were sent out.
Okay.
Now, observer missions had certain preconditions that the peace agreement between the warring factions had been arrived at, and this mission was only supposed to oversee that peace was restored within the framework of the peace agreement.
Okay.
Today, United Nations has become more of a, I must say, peace enforcement agency.
Okay.
That's how troops are going, equipment is going. You are finding APCs also, mechanized vehicles also accompanying the troop columns. So the complexion has totally changed, and this has changed because in the initial stages of the operations, the peace agreements are not being negotiated between the warring factions, and the troops are inducted into that area. Partially, there is some understanding which takes place, but in Central America, this was not the case. We went in at a stage where the entire peace process had been established. We were to go and disarm the Contras.
So, which all countries were affected by the UN peacekeeping mission there?
Now, this mission was one of its unique missions. We were operating in 7 countries.
Okay.
Starting from Nicaragua to Honduras, Costa Rica, then Guatemala, Salvador. These were the countries, and all these were dependent upon one another. That means some activity was taking place in the neighboring countries which was affecting the functioning of the other country. And once the demobilization was agreed to by the Contras, that is the stage when we were supposed to take the weapons from them.
Okay.
And thereafter, the UN humanitarian angle was to come in at a very fast pace in terms of providing them land, in terms of...
So, did these things go as planned, more or less?
Yes, exactly. And that is a mission on record which brought in stability in the shortest possible time.
Right, I'll just come back to you. General Litter, the UN mission in Sudan is very different, particularly in South Sudan. This is the first place where you have something called a hybrid mission. Now, how did that come about?
See, firstly, I just want to reinforce what Virender has said.
Yes.
It's been a paradigm shift in the way the UN operates its peacekeeping. From the traditional peacekeeping, which were monitoring ceasefires, monitoring redeployment of forces, we are talking about multi-discipline, multi-dimensional missions, which are looking at a whole lot of array of activities, supporting the political process, protection of civilians, protection of women in sexual conflict, etc. So the spectrum is very large, and peacekeepers are expected to play that huge role. Now, in South Sudan, a very strange situation developed when I was in Sudan. There was an African mission in Darfur, that's a port of North Sudan. And when we carried out the technical assessment mission to rehat this mission under the United Nations mission, the government and some powers in African Union resisted, and that's how this hybrid concept came about. So for the first time in UN's history, we have a UNAMID, a hybrid United Nations African mission in Darfur, which continues, and which I must tell you is one of the largest missions.
What does it mean? You have a hybrid mission, which means you have troops from Africa and out of Africa?
Well, it was supposed to be that, but slowly it actually has developed into a near African mission, because the government there has been very particular and sensitive to non-Africans coming in. And the second thing is that this mission is now controlled by 2 bureaucracies, you know. The UN bureaucracy is good enough, but you have the AU and the UN, and that has brought about dynamics of its own.
So, how many UN missions do you have in South Sudan, and what is the Indian involvement in these missions?
Right. So now, before 9/11, when South Sudan was really born, we had 2 missions in Sudan. That is the United Nations in Sudan, which was looking after both South and North, and a separate hybrid mission in Darfur, what I told you. Now, moment 9 July, UNMISS finished its mandate. North people did not want the UN presence there, in spite of a lot of unresolved issues between the North and the South, which we insisted actually should be resolved. But another interesting area called Abyei was unresolved. Abyei was supposed to have a separate referendum whether to join the North and the South. So, over a period of time, another mission has come up in Abyei, which is called UNISFA, the United Nations Interim Stabilization Force in Abyei, which is of an Ethiopian brigade. That is again very one of the.
So that is the second mission.
That is the second mission. So really speaking, Abyei mission is bordering North and South. So it's affecting both the countries today. So there is a complete mission in South Sudan. There is a mission in between North and South, which is Abyei UNISFA, and there is another hybrid mission, which is Darfur. So there are 3 missions.
So what is the Indian involvement in the mission?
Indian
Do we have a
involvement-
brigade group there or what?
No, no, no. Indian millet in South Sudan comprise of nearly 2,002 troops, as your news clipping showed. Basically, there are 2 battalions, and there is a combat engineering company, and there's a level 2 hospital. So these are the people there, and both the battalions are actually deployed in the Upper Nile state, of which Jonglei forms a part.
Now, since you have a long background in Sudan, give us a brief on what the political situation there is in South Sudan, and which are the forces which are actually arraigned against South Sudan.
Well, you see, South Sudan fought with the North over the last 40 years. They had a small ceasefire in between, and the North was always blamed for proxy fighting in the South.
Okay.
So they brought in ethnic communities to fight with each other, mainly the Dinkas, the Murle, the Shuluks, and so there was always this propping up, and South Sudan's history of independence actually is replete with examples where South Sudan people were fighting amongst themselves. Now that unfortunately left a hangover when the independence is there. A lot of people who had huge aspirations for appointments or other things, promotions in the army, did not get their due, and that's where the disgruntlement has started. So there are some groups today, which we call spoilers, basically, who are not satisfied with the SPLA-dominated government, which is in Juba, and there are parts where this resistance is going on, and most predominantly it is going on in Jonglei.
But the media reports suggest that the government in South Sudan is very repressive, and possibly whatever is happening there is a fallout of this repression, and this is leading to renewed ethnic violence.
Yes. See, there are huge number of small arms in South Sudan, over 1 million. It's one of the greatest small arms area, if you say. Now, the government tried the community disarmament programs. All communities are disarmed.
Right.
But in the absence of a state machinery to bring about law and order, communities have been naturally very, very apprehensive about getting disarmed, and a lot of places where they disarmed people reacted back. So all communities are armed, and they take it upon themselves to guard themselves. The main economic factor in South Sudan is cattle, and there's a huge amount of cattle rustling. People just come and raid cattle. In fact, I must tell you that the main contributory factor for a marriage is a cow. And when a Dinka women or other women get married, they have to offer, the boy's family has to offer so many cows actually to purchase the girl.
Well, this is almost like what used to happen in Punjab maybe 100 years ago. No?
maybe. But still carry on. So now because of that, we have these frequent cases what are called cow rustling. Now animal rustling, and that leads to a lot of casualties amongst the soft targets of the civilian population.
But what is the role of the government of Northern Sudan, or Sudan as we call it now? I mean, there have been all kinds of allegations that they have been kind of aiding and abetting the rebels in South Sudan.
Kamar, unfortunately, in Africa, where the borders are very loose and the communities actually transgress either way, these are allegations everywhere. If you see Sudan, it blames with Chad, and Chadian rebels operate in Darfur. There have been problems earlier of SPLA, the southern group operating from Ethiopia, Eritrea. Then there's a Lord's Resistance group which actually transgresses whole lot of South African countries. So these allegations are always there. After all, the weapons are coming from somewhere. The South blames the North. The North denies it vehemently.
That's right.
In fact, I must tell you that the North today actually blames the South for 2 of the left of areas which are in the North for arming the rebels there. So it's a mutual blame game going on out here, and to be honest, I would suppose that some sort of support is going on.
Right. Before we go into a break, General Kumar, you almost landed up in Congo. You were to lead a mission to Congo. Then what happened? The mission never went.
He was in, General Leader was in the MO Directorate that time.
So did he scuttle it? I mean,
No, not at all.
I won't. Varinder is a good old friend.
Well, all these missions there is some underlying, let me tell you frankly, I must say government aims, objectives behind these missions. And Congo already had a brigade over there. But here was an opportunity when the voting in the Security Council was to take place for the expanded version.
Okay.
And India was at the verge of getting a seat over there and would have secured a berth there. Now, in that probably expanded moment, this was an opportunity where had India pumped in one more brigade, probably it would have brought dividends. But before this could happen, I think there was some undercurrents which proved that India is not going to make headway in that. So that's how, otherwise everything was on the cards, and even the units had been earmarked.
So you scared being a part of all this action that came up much later after that?
Very true, but I think these areas are quite interesting to serve till, of course, one lands up in a situation like
Absolutely. General Kumar, in Central America where you were, do you still have a UN presence? Why I ask is because in countries like Costa Rica, there is no problem. Those countries are at absolute peace with themselves.
Very true. After this mission, this was in fact the only mission which has wound up in a record time, and thereafter there has been no presence over there. Peace has been restored, elections were held, and everything is normal.
In almost all countries?
All the countries. Only Costa Rica, why it was also a part of this mission was because some support Costa Rica, actually these Costa Rica was providing sanctuaries to these Contras for training purposes, etc., in the jungles which border with Nicaragua. So that's why, though it had very little role to play even at that point of time. But
how do you think the peace actually came about? I mean, how much was the UN contribution, and did these countries also kind of get together, combine, help the UN achieve peace?
Exactly. Now, to this, I would like to say a few words to the extent. First is the country who heads the mission. Like, say, we had the head of our mission was from Spain.
Right.
Now, this was a Spanish agenda because entire Central America has got a Spanish-speaking community over there. And it was Spain's interest that peace is restored in this part of the world as early as possible.
Right.
And with the cooperation of Spanish government, direct liaison was taking place with the United Nations headquarters. The local countries, of course, those all are banana republics actually. They had hardly any say to it.
Right.
It was in USA's interest at that point of time that peace is restored in this part of the world. So hence it was a combination of all these factors and of course the will of the local people. They took active part in making sure that peace is restored at the earliest.
Right. General Leader, to come back to South Sudan, who do you think is responsible for this attack on the UN peacekeepers?
It's very difficult to say. David Yayo, who controls the Murle tribe, has denied it, and so has the South Sudan Democratic Forces. To be honest with you, the SPLA is not purely a disciplined, structured army as it should be. It's a loose confederation of a whole lot of tribes which are amalgamated over a period of time. And I always used to say when I was in South Sudan that your biggest challenge, and I told the president when I was leaving, he says, what do you think is the biggest challenge? I said, the SPLA. This is the army which has fought for you and brought the freedom, and yet this is a highly ill-disciplined guerrilla force, and unless you discipline it, they would be there. But you see what happens when it's been purely a military-oriented freedom. There are huge aspirations on ethnic lines, on other lines, and when those aspirations are not met, people already are armed. They have weapons with them.
No, but the rebel leader, David Yayo, he has denied it, but all media reports are suggesting that that group is actually responsible for the attack.
See, he will always deny it. No, all these people have aspirations, and they're always trying to make the government look like a villain everywhere where the rebels are go. So no group will ever, anywhere in the world, own responsibility. They will always blame the government. They will always say this is the orchestrated thing. And it's very difficult to do. I wouldn't be surprised if part of the SPLA has done it out here, because there are a lot of elements in SPLA which are not under the coherent command control structure.
That's what some of the rebel groups are saying, and they're saying that the SPLA has done it before.
Yes, of course. SPLA shot down a UN helicopter, and we've had cases when I was there, both in my political and military assignment, where there were a lot of such similar instances.
General Leader, since this mission is under Chapter 7 of the United Nations, now the Chapter 7 actually allows the peacekeepers to use force to enforce peace. How come despite that you still had very heavy casualties?
See, this is putting it very simplistically. Chapter 7 allows you to proactively carry out certain operations on fixed areas, but you cannot, UN is not a war-waging machinery. It is basically for peacekeeping. So Chapter 7 is just a safeguard for you on surgical specific operations where you may like to operate. Now here was a classical case, an administrative convoy, and I've gone into the details. The convoy was well armed, operating on the road, had taken also precautions. Ambushed by nearly 200 people from either side of the road. It was raining heavily, so the movement was very sluggish in South Sudan. Literally the movement becomes...
But you don't have a system of road opening parties like we have in JNK?
No. That much manpower is not there. So whenever the UN has to move elsewhere, you have convoys which escort. There is a head, there is a tail, there is a middle, which is all there. But this convoy seems to have suddenly come under helium fire. To be fair, they have, I'm told, reacted very well.
Could there be laxity on the part of the peacekeepers?
This is very difficult, Kanwar, sitting here in such, air-conditioned rooms actually to pass comments, and I wouldn't dare to do that. It's up to the tactical commanders. Every time such an incident happens, we've been commanders down the line. I think you must analyze and try and upgrade your responses wherever even small deficiencies come in.
But would there be some kind of a court of inquiry to actually establish the reasons for heavy casualties and how and why the convoy came under fire?
The UN always has a board of inquiry. So this will be, when there's a very serious incident, the UN headquarter orders a board of inquiry. Otherwise, a mission board of inquiry. Okay. I presume in this case, it'll be because it forms in part of normal mission dynamics. There will certainly be a board of inquiry because then processing of claims and everything, gets linked onto the board of inquiry.
Now, since 5 of our soldiers have been killed, will the UN compensate the families of these soldiers, or is it left to the host country to actually look after the families?
No. The UN has very good compensation programs, and I can assure you that these people will be well compensated. That's not an issue at all. On the medical side, whether it's the medical treatment or the compensation, I think it's quite happy.
Now, General Leader, there is also a feeling that for the safety of the troops, we should deploy whole formations and not have kind of piecemeal troops and then put them together into a group, as appears to have happened in this case, no?
Well, let me tell you my views, Kanwar. I think UN is all about heterogeneity. I have always believed that you should have homogeneity up to unit level, but the UN strength lies in heterogeneity. And you see, we have deployed a brigade in Congo. How has done better than anything else out there? In fact, when you have heterogeneous thing, you can mix around with different nationalities. I'm sure Virendra will bear it out. That's been my experience. You can, actually cross-fertilize, get better ideas, and you are accepted as a multinational thing. Otherwise, there is this tendency of Indian brigade, Indian so-and-so. We should do away with that. We should go homogeneous combat units, but in a heterogeneous UN environment.
Jal Kumar, India's contribution to the United Nations is huge. But there is a feeling that wherever we do not have a national interest, India should not send its troops. What is your take on that?
I think that shouldn't be looked at from this angle. India is further emerging as a responsible country. It has got a place in the world, and these are the places where one can go under the flag of the UN, express yourself over there, show to the world that you are also concerned for humanity in the larger cause. Otherwise, from where do the forces come from? Like, there was a proposal earlier that the UN should have its own dedicated force created.
That's right.
To be launched into such areas. And Brahmi report has also recommended a lot of recommendations for the forces to be deployed. But in reality, that cannot happen. UN would remain, as General Leader has also brought out, a multi-nation, a multicultural type of a force to bring in neutrality. Ultimately, the aim is to have a neutral stance under one common flag, which is the blue flag.
Right, General Leader, what is your opinion? Should India send troops to places which are of no consequence to us, as they often say, where even angels fear to tread? Places in Africa?
This is a cumulative decision between the MEA and the government and the armed forces and all that. It has its pluses and minuses. I agree with Virendra. I think we should not be showing too much that we are only being choosy about going where our national interests are involved. Our troops, both the Indian Army as well as the Indian state, I think projection of power in whatever way we can, even to far-flung areas, has its own pluses.
There is also a feeling that these deployments give very good operational exposure, but it leads to a lot of other issues. It leads often to moral depravity. I mean, we had instances of that kind.
Yes, there have been sad instances of sexual abuse now. We've had reports in Congo and elsewhere, very rare. I must tell you that the Indian peacekeepers have an excellent track record of this thing, and these are aberrations which come in. But I do agree with you, and I have always harped, wherever there are aberrations, we should not take them as aberrations. We should come down full form to investigate along with the UN and bring the perpetrators to book and show that Indian Army and the Indian state is fully impartial and operating in an environment to further the UN cause.
Since there were allegations of molestation and of sexual nature, were there inquiries into all that? Were some people punished?
Of course, there are. This is a very standard format. The UN is coming down. It's got a zero tolerance policy on sexual abuse. Every time there is an incident reported, the host country is informed, in this case India, and the host country is supposed to carry out an inquiry, and the UN follows it up, actually what action has been taken. And I think the Indian record has been pretty good in this.
Right. Thank you very much for joining us in the discussion. The death of 5 Indian peacekeepers in South Sudan is unfortunate. One hopes that the Indian government and the UN will look into the reasons of the attack and ensure that the people responsible for it are taken to task. That is all in Defense Line today. Do write your feedback. Good luck and goodbye.
खबरों की दुनिया में आइए, हमारे साथ कहीं भी और कभी भी जुड़िए। हम मिलेंगे फेसबुक पर, हम दिखेंगे यूट्यूब पर, हमें फॉलो कीजिए ट्विटर पर। खबरों के साथ बने रहिए रात दिन।